I am currently reviewing every single episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars. In this video, I'll be covering Season 3. Make sure to check out my reviews of Seasons 1 and 2 if you haven't already. There's always going to be exceptions, but about halfway through Season 3, The Clone Wars really starts getting good. The content gets a little more serious, and the overall quality gets a little bit higher every arc. If you're not in and invested by the end of this season, then I don't know what to tell you. This is where it really hooked me. The combat animation has improved so much at this point. It's no longer flashing from pose to pose, but more continuous movements. The animation overall is looking much more natural. Our main characters will get a new redesign in the middle of the season as well. Season 3 takes the liberty of sometimes jumping back in time to explore events leading up to previous episodes we've seen. So keep in mind that these stories may or may not be in chronological order going forward. With that in mind, let's get into it. Season 3, Episode 1, Clone Cadets. This first two-part arc creates a set of bookends around Season 1, Episode 5. We go back in time to see the training of those three clones we met, Heavy, Fives, and Echo, plus Cut Up, who is pretty funny, and one more guy who doesn't get a name for some reason. I enjoy seeing how the clones live and train before they are actually dispatched. It establishes a context behind their strong brotherly camaraderie. Master Shakti is the Jedi assigned to oversee the clones' training. Her defining trait is being all in on the selflessness of the Jedi, on seeing the individual and the group as
one and the same,
as she says. Her generous second chance to Domino Squad contrasts with this hired bounty hunter, who cares more about getting paid than the clones, and doesn't want to waste his time on what he sees as guaranteed failures. Ironically, his dismissive rudeness is part of what pushes this squad toward success. The character of 99 shows us what happens to some clones who fail training or are born with genetic defects. You can understand where he's coming from. The struggle of feeling left out, kept from doing what you were born to do because of something you can't control. That makes it all the more remarkable that he's kind instead of bitter, and it's sweet that he's the main catalyst that brings this young team together. 99's good advice comes from his different perspective because, as he tells Heavy,
I never even got my chance. It's a chance you're throwing away.
You also feel those moments of connection between Heavy and 99 a lot more, remembering that Heavy won't make it back. I ended up with a lot to talk about here. One critique, though, I would have liked a moment where Domino Squad as a group talked about working together, instead of them each having individual lightbulb moments, because they do just suddenly pass the test without really talking to each other beforehand, but it's still a nice character arc to watch. Season 3, Episode 2, ARC Troopers. Chronologically, this episode takes place right after Season 1, Episode 5, with the destruction of an outpost vital to Kamino's security. Ventress returns after being absent all of Season 2, and we finally see both her and Grievous working together, which is cool and definitely a threat. Unfortunately, Ventress is also unnecessarily weird in this one again. Because this is such an all-out attack on one of the most important locations for the Republic, the stakes feel really high, and 99's tragic death adds to that. I really enjoyed the well-designed lightsaber duels between Anakin and Ventress, and Obi-Wan versus Grievous. They are both longer and more intricate than any Clone Wars fights so far. This is a really solid episode overall, with lots of quality action grounded by an emotional center. Season 3, Episode 3, Supply Lines. Senator Bail Organa and Jar Jar Binks versus Trade Federation leader Lot Dodd in a diplomatic fight over Toydaria is not exactly my ideal Clone Wars episode. It is based on legit war politics, which is interesting to an extent, but there's too much of it here. They at least try to remind you of the stakes of Toydaria's support in cutting back to the people on Ryloth. I did actually feel sad about the death of Master Dai. Yes, they did name him that and then kill him immediately. But anyway, a very mediocre episode. I don't know what the heck Jar Jar's distraction thing was, but there's no way he should be that coordinated. Season 3, Episode 4, Sphere of Influence. This episode makes Trade Federation politics slightly more entertaining by mixing it with a mystery plot and some sneaking around. I like Senator Chuchi. She's brave and smart and makes a good friend for Ahsoka, so their scenes are alright. But otherwise, there's not much else I liked here. I didn't care enough about the new Pantoran chairman and his family to keep me invested. It's a bit slow-paced as well, and Jabba and Greedo sort of felt dragged in out of nowhere. Honestly, I had to really try to find stuff to say about this one, and I guess that's a criticism in itself. This moment was pretty funny though.
Should you really proceed without the Council's approval?
We do it all the time, don't we, Snips?
Yep.
Season 3, Episode 5, Corruption. There's not a lot of action in this one, just even more trade politics, but it's much better here because it's about Mandalore. The more time we spend on this planet and the more we learn about the culture and the politics, the more it feels like a real, fully developed place. It makes sense that they would explore a friendship between Padme and Satine. I always like Padme better when she connects with other characters I like, so it works for me. This episode effectively highlights their similar idealism and strong integrity. Their investigation is fun to watch, and Satine's personal involvement shows how caring and determined a leader she is. Corruption and bribery in government, and the use of concerning methods to increase profits in the food industry are real and serious issues, both in the Republic and in our own world, and I think this episode explored that pretty well. This content is much more interesting to me than the previous 2 episodes. Was this guy not right that burning the warehouse is just totally unnecessary, though? I don't get it. Season 3, Episode 6, The Academy. This episode is setting us up for Ahsoka's character redesign in a few episodes. In this situation on Mandalore, she's not the young and naive one in the group for once, which is new for her. This is the most grown-up and responsible she's ever had to be, without her lightsaber as well. As Duchess Satine hoped, Ahsoka helps discover the high-level corruption in Mandalore's government, which was set up in Episode 5. I thought Ahsoka's lesson on corruption was a pretty well-written explanation for kids watching this show. These cadets are kinda dumb, but also kinda endearing. You understand that they took Ahsoka's words to heart and meant well, and some of their suspicions were right in the end. Them body slamming the guards here is absolutely ridiculous though, come on. I find Prime Minister Almec's reasoning to be understandable, while also knowing that he is, of course, a corrupt politician and a terrible person, who is willing to torture Satine to get a confession for his conspiracy out of her. What the heck, bro? That's really bad. At the end, Anakin half-heartedly rebukes Ahsoka for the risks she took, and she just replies,
Nothing you wouldn't have done.
Just makes you consider again what kind of example Anakin is setting for Ahsoka, but she did also succeed, as he usually does too. Season 3, Episode 7, Assassin. I have more to say on this episode than I expected, actually. We continue the Ahsoka without Anakin theme of the last episode, as Ahsoka is pushed to keep growing stronger and more competent on her own. She experiences new aspects of the Force in her visions, and she learns when to trust herself, even through the mistakes and the false alarms. Like with Satine in Episode 5, I appreciate that they tried to develop a friendship between Padme and Ahsoka. The moment Padme empathizes with Ahsoka feeling scared, uncertain, and alone, and gives her encouragement is a sweet moment. The last half of this episode is just the action of trying to catch Aurra Sing, which had some decent suspense and twists. Zero being the one who hired her, however, was disappointing to say the least. But it explains that these events take place before Season 1, Episode 22, when Zero was broken out of prison. And the intro tells us that it's also after Season 2, Episode 22, when Aurra Sing was presumed dead. I told y'all this timeline was gonna get complicated. Season 3, Episode 8, Evil Plans. I would never have asked for an R2 and 3PO shopping side quest, but at least we go back in time and get some more Cad Bane and Toto. This episode explains how they got into the Senate building in the Season 1 finale, which is cool, after you get through the wacky droids boss stuff, of course. Just one of the random, goofy, one-off episodes. It's kinda entertaining, I guess, but there's not much to talk about. Why is Anakin really just hanging out at Padme's house party like everyone knows they're together? What is this? Season 3, Episode 9, Hunt for Zero. Obi-Wan's dynamic with Quinlan Vos is really funny. Vos is clearly a rogue loner type, reminiscent of Qui-Gon, but even more relaxed and unconcerned, which definitely clashes with Obi-Wan's strict, organized personality.
Let's just say he's crazy.
It is cool to see a Jedi with a unique skill like psychometry, which is sensing the history of objects through the Force. I really enjoyed the final showdown with Cad Bane as well. The two lightsabers being tossed around between them all was some fun choreography. However, I really did not need any more Zero the Hutt, or a romance between him and Cy Snoodles. Thank goodness she betrayed and killed him, I guess. The huge Hutt mom is also so weird. Just a super weird episode in general, but it was nice to have a break from the heavily political tone of Season 3 so far. Season 3, Episode 10, Heroes on Both Sides. I love the character redesigns. They're so much cleaner and more aesthetic. The chunky armor is iconic, and it was fun for a while, but I like the classic Jedi look a lot more. It shows off how much the animation has improved as well. I do think it was time for Ahsoka to look like an older teenager, even if it's not quite realistic time-wise. They really did that just in time for her to have a possible crush as well, which I don't mind at all. It's cute and funny. There's actually so much happening in this episode, and it's very good content. Senator Bonteri and others like her can see the true corruption in the Senate and the Jedi Order, but they've also unknowingly misplaced their trust in Count Dooku. We also see how much the corporations in the Senate are trying to profit off continued war. It's messy and complicated, as Ahsoka is coming to realize. While I think there is overall too much politics in the first half of this season, I also think that showing us the separatist point of view was a really great idea. It makes the Clone Wars politics much more grounded and thought-provoking when you have to think about the real people on the other side. The way Anakin clumsily sums up the war at the beginning of the episode really shows how much it doesn't make sense. He really wants to believe in the perspective that makes fighting justified, but as Ahsoka learns from Padme's more nuanced perspective, Ahsoka starts to challenge Anakin on that too. Introducing all of these ideas through Ahsoka's eyes makes it an important part of her arc toward disillusionment. The process of learning that things are not as simple as you thought as a kid is a universally relatable experience, and this relatability is what makes Ahsoka a more compelling and clearly defined character from this point on. She's often a great audience stand-in, especially for viewers around her age. These disguised sweeper droids are pretty cool and scary. It is tragic knowing that peace negotiations might have worked out if Dooku and Palpatine weren't working against it behind the scenes. Season 3, Episode 11, Pursuit of Peace. Episodes 10 and 11 both provide more context for Season 2, Episode 15, when Senator Farr was murdered. It is sad to hear that Padme sharing Senator Bonteri's name with Palpatine got her killed. I liked Padme hearing from Tekla about how the war is affecting the people of the Republic, and using her genuine empathy to sway the vote. I guess if things really are that bad, then the Republic is totally running out of money, and she's right about the Senate's misplaced priorities. At the end of the episode, there's also an interesting hint about how much Masameda might be in on Palpatine's plans. All those individual pieces of this episode are good, but other than that, it's mostly just more boring Senate content we've seen before, just with banking clan politics this time. The chase scenes aren't that engaging, and honestly, I think I've had enough Padme lately. There's also been way too many attempts to assassinate her. This is getting ridiculous, guys. Season 3, Episode 12, Night Sisters. It's finally time to begin Ventress's character development. The beginning of this episode feels like the start of Revenge of the Sith, and I love it. You can tell right away that Ventress is furious about being abandoned by Dooku, and you can tell he genuinely doesn't want to do it. I doubt he really cares about her, but he at least finds her very valuable. On another note, Dooku really gets to show off his skills in this episode. The suspense is unfortunately limited by the knowledge that he can't die, but Dooku's fight with Ventress and the invisible Night Sisters was still very cool and intense. Speaking of, this is the first time in Star Wars that Dathomir and the Night Sisters are introduced. They're pretty creepy and demonic, but a super interesting, important, and unique group of characters in Star Wars. And through their magic, we finally see Ventress's tragic backstory. She was taken from the Night Sisters as a young child, and she lost 2 Jedi Masters before turning to the dark side and being recruited by Dooku. This gives her so much more depth and makes me feel sympathetic for who she became and why. Overall, a really solid episode that pushes forward a greater storyline for the whole show, kinda for the first time. That's why I think this arc specifically marks the turning point in the Clone Wars as it moves toward a more serious, high-quality direction.
Ventress, you're not looking well.
She never does.
Season 3, Episode 13, Monster. I was fully engaged watching this whole episode. It's a good second part to a very important arc. Some of Ventress's trials are a little goofy, but I generally enjoyed the action, and the hand-to-hand fight choreography is well done. We are introduced to Savage Opress, what a name, another Zabrak from Maul's village, who will be a new major story-driving character. We also see how much the Night Sisters really control the Night Brothers. They can come in and do whatever they want, including forcing Savage to kill his own brother and to become a pawn they can use against Dooku. Savage did love his brother and tried to protect him, and the witches treated Savage like an object and turned him into this murderous monster. It's tragic, and you have to wonder how much of that happened to Maul as well. Turns out Sidious was right to suspect Dooku of wanting to become more powerful than him, huh? It is the Sith way, after all. Season 3, Episode 14, Witches of the Mist. I think it's so interesting to see a Sith training an apprentice in the dark side. Dooku talks about using technique to harness the strength of your anger, and encourages Savage's hate by inflicting pain on him. Savage and Dooku actually reminded me of Luke and Yoda in Empire, when Savage says,
"What you ask is impossible,"
referring to lifting heavy things like Luke did. Obi-Wan, ever the negotiator, warns Anakin against angering or hurting the Night Brothers, and says to just let him handle it. But Anakin, of course, gets the job done, only getting their attention by threatening their leader. I thought the banter in that scene was funny. Obi-Wan is smart in his conversation with Mother Talzin, though. Literally everyone relies on her help here. She has a lot of power. I enjoyed the action in this episode as well. Savage demonstrates his raw, still untamed strength, but it's Dooku who really feels like a frighteningly powerful Sith Lord. Mother Talzin's plan to have their enemy train his own assassin was clever, but Ventress was right that Savage definitely needed more time in training. I actually felt bad for her feeling like a failure in the end, now knowing everything that's happened to her. But, most importantly, it's confirmed that Darth Maul is coming back, baby! I really like the way they set this up. Maul is mentioned in the last episode, then Obi-Wan thinks for a second that Savage is Maul, and then you think, surely they can't, and then boom, they do! Oh my gosh, y'all better be excited for when Maul comes back, because I have so much to say on some of those episodes. Season 3, Episode 15, Overlords. If the last arc marks a significant turning point in this show, these next 3 episodes certainly confirm it. The Mortis arc is one of the craziest and somehow best ideas ever executed in Clone Wars. It's definitely one of my more rewatched arcs, if only because I've been trying so hard to understand it. The first time I watched it, I thought this arc was so utterly unique compared to anything I'd ever seen that I was immediately invested. Mortis expands on the nature of the Force and the Chosen One prophecy in a truly fascinating way that somehow connects to the prequel movies more than almost anything else in the show. If you had any doubts about Anakin being the Chosen One, Mortis will dispel them all by adding cosmically epic stakes to his story.
This is getting interesting.
Everything in this episode is important and tells us more about each character, including the entertaining group banter, of course. Obi-Wan talks to Qui-Gon's ghost about Anakin as the Chosen One, about training the most powerful Jedi with the most dangerous potential. Ahsoka talks to a vision of her future self, who warns her about the inner contradictions she is picking up from her master. Anakin talks to the son, disguised as his mother, prompting him to say something profoundly character-revealing.
The only love I feel in my heart is haunted by what would happen should I let go.
Anakin falls to the dark side in the end because he becomes driven by this fear of loss. The father's deep, unnaturally layered voice immediately conveys the feeling that he is an otherworldly higher power. The moment he grabs and closes Anakin's lightsaber is chilling, and so is the moment he makes Anakin choose between saving his master or his apprentice. When Anakin first spoke with the father, he believed that
The Chosen One is a myth.
but by the end of this episode, Anakin passes the father's test by rejecting the dichotomy, controlling both the son and daughter, and ultimately proving himself to be the Chosen One. He begins to wrestle with the truth of who he really is, and all the power that comes with that. This episode effectively sets up just enough of this mysterious world for me to understand that the daughter and the son represent the light and dark sides of the Force, respectively, and the father is like a chosen one, keeping them in balance. But other than that, I really still have no idea what's going on and want to keep watching to learn more. The unprecedented power of this place and these beings means that all sorts of new and strange things can happen. And this is definitely not the last time we're going to hear the Imperial March theme. Season 3, Episode 16, Altar of Mortis. This episode reveals just a little bit more about the nature of these godlike figures in each conversation. While the father was the focus of the previous episode, we now hear more from the son and the daughter about their own beliefs and ambitions. When Ahsoka is taken by the son, we get the perfect example of Obi-Wan and Anakin's personalities at odds. Obi-Wan wants to be cautious, to avoid conflict in a potentially galaxy-altering situation they don't understand, and to ask advice from someone who does. But an impulsive, angry, guilt-ridden Anakin wants to go fight to save his Padawan as soon as possible, no matter what the consequences. Seeing a corrupted Sith-eyed Ahsoka and then a lifeless blank-eyed Ahsoka is one of the more unnerving things we've seen in Clone Wars for sure. I like the detail that this corrupted version really doesn't fight like the real Ahsoka would. She's way more directly aggressive and a bit less acrobatic. The way the son's echoing voice is sometimes layered over hers is also creepy in a very well done way. The daughter and the son switching forms mid-battle is super cool, and so is this godkiller sword design. The death of the daughter, and the gift of her life force to revive Ahsoka, pushes the stakes of this arc even higher, leaving this planet and thus the Force now completely out of balance. Even with all his cryptic wisdom, the father did not predict this result. Mortis does mean death in Latin though, so maybe he should've. This episode is probably the weakest of the three, but it's still really good. This moment should not be so funny to me.
He is just so selfish and was taking too long to die, so I decided to move things along.
I just love Sam Witwer, he's the best. Season 3, Episode 17, Ghosts of Mortis. I'm glad they brought Qui-Gon into this arc, but I'm not so sure about his advice here. He definitely believes in Anakin a little too much. I love how much Obi-Wan is not just passively along for the ride in these last two episodes. He was the one who took the initiative and got the sword in episode 16, and now he's not gonna let Anakin face the darkness alone, whatever the father says. He really went from
We must not get involved.
to
The way I see it, if we were not supposed to interfere, Ahsoka and I wouldn't be here in the first place.
the visuals of the landscape and sky of Mortis are really striking and creative throughout this arc, and there's many beautiful shots, but this is one of the most iconic shots in the whole Clone Wars show. The sun shows Anakin his terrible future, everything he does after falling to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader. In order to avoid that future at all costs, Anakin turns to the dark side early. And it's really not a good sign that Anakin could be persuaded to do this even at this point in his story. It was also pretty powerful to me hearing a few lines from Revenge of the Sith, spoken instead by these versions of Anakin and Obi-Wan, which I've grown to love and understand much more deeply than their movie counterparts. Of course, they couldn't let Anakin remember his future. I would have thought Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Anakin all wouldn't remember anything when they wake up at the end as well, but that doesn't actually happen. Because these events are never addressed again, however, I think this arc is not intended to seriously affect these characters in their own future, or to progress the overall story of the Clone Wars. It's intended primarily to give us as viewers a fresh perspective on the Force and on Anakin as the Chosen One. At the end of episode 15, the Father told Anakin another prophecy, that the Chosen One would take the Father's place on Mortis to keep the son and daughter in balance. And now we see that he did kind of fulfill that prophecy, but not in the way the Father expected. The daughter, the son, and now the Father all died because Anakin showed up. This really drives home his importance, in case you didn't get it already, but it does not bode well for how Anakin might bring balance again later. While it is super different and wild, seemingly out of nowhere, I do love this arc, partially because of that. I really just wanted to keep watching every episode instead of taking notes. Season 3, Episode 18, The Citadel. This episode has some random details that are just cool to me. There's no other word for it. The opening scene explains why hyperspace lane coordinates are important. I like the use of carbon freezing tech, and the eerie look of this half-destroyed planet is very cool. We see Anakin, again, being fiercely protective of the people he cares about, and not wanting Ahsoka to come to the Citadel. I can understand her being annoyed and not wanting to be left out on an important mission and learning experience, but I think I'd be with Anakin on this one. An old prison designed for holding Jedi sounds very dangerous, also a very cool idea, and its intimidating design fits the vibe for sure. As I've said before, I really enjoy heist plots in general, so I enjoyed the stealth action and strategy in this episode. I also laughed at the detail that Anakin's metal hand gets him stuck to the magnetic ceiling. An interesting idea to bring in young Tarkin. I find him slightly annoying, but it is entertaining to watch him interact with Anakin, knowing their relationship in the future. Season 3, Episode 19, Counterattack. The discussion between Anakin and Tarkin becomes intriguing, as Tarkin directly voices some of the struggles Anakin has with the Jedi Code. They are on the same page when it comes to doing whatever it takes to achieve victory. Otherwise, even with the sad loss of Echo, there's not a lot to talk about here. This episode focuses on each team trying to execute their part of the plan, and the action is entertaining enough, I guess. But even when Obi-Wan's group got caught, I didn't feel much tension. Both Master Peel and Commander Sobek aren't unique or interesting enough to really add anything either. This episode feels artificially stretched in order to make this arc 3 episodes long, and the characters basically ended up right back where they started at the beginning.
I must say, you're not at all what I pictured. Someone with such a soft voice.
Wow, Obi-Wan, you're really too hilarious. R2's repurposed droids are actually pretty funny too. Season 3, Episode 20, Citadel Rescue. The fight with the Anubas was actually really fun to watch. We get some epic Jedi moves from Obi-Wan and Anakin. Unfortunately, this episode starts to feel pretty repetitive. Like the previous one, it doesn't give me much more than some decent action, and more discussion with and about Tarkin. I don't care about Commander Sobek being pressured by Dooku, or enough about Master Peel to really feel sad about his death. This arc feels very dragged out by the end, which is a bummer because I think it started out good, and the concept had potential. It's nice to see Ahsoka handle this dangerous mission well, and I think Obi-Wan's concluding line is very important.
If we sacrifice our code, even for victory, we may lose that which is most important, our honor.
But when this episode was finally over, I was ready to move on. Season 3, Episode 21, Padawan Lost. When Ahsoka is captured, Anakin must struggle to handle the potential loss of his Padawan. Him telling Plo Koon,
"I will not leave her fate up to others,"
is an important quote that again reveals Anakin's control issues, even if it is for the purpose of protecting others. Master Plo has a good point that he needs to let go and trust his Padawan more, and Plo is the perfect person to say so because of his kind nature and personal connection to Ahsoka. I don't mind seeing another episode with Ahsoka becoming a strong leader and strategist apart from Anakin. However, the scenes with Anakin are the most interesting in this episode, and it's not introducing anything new thematically. I like the super unique look of this planet, but I don't particularly care for the Trandoshan hunters, even though I get how they are supposed to be creepy. Season 3, Episode 22, Wookiee Hunt. I didn't need Chewbacca to show up in this show, but whatever. This episode is just the second half of the previous one, with the young group of Jedi outsmarting the Trandoshans and escaping. The reunion with Anakin and Ahsoka is sweet, but this really isn't my favorite plot in the show. The action isn't amazing either. I always get bored and skim through the end of this one, honestly. So you know what? This video is getting too long anyway. I don't feel the need to say more. This last arc is very skippable, I think. And that's the end of Season 3, I guess. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, consider subscribing to follow the rest of the series. Sorry this one took longer than I would have liked, cause hey, life happens. But Season 4 is my favorite season, and there's way too much good content I can't wait to talk about. So, until then, may the Force be with you.